The way I look at this town is it's one of the few places where you don't have to be artistically constipated. If you come up with something you want to explore and you want to do it, you can call some people and say, hey, I want to try this. Whereas that would be a problem a lot of places. People will come and try out something. So why not? You might as well say, okay, it opens up. It gets crazier and crazier how much music you can kind of get into and you start to absorb.
I know Jonathan. He loves music. He loves music. He lives for music. It's everything to him. It's his whole being. It's his whole living is tied up with music.
I suppose the Tom Paines, as well as we've seen those 007. It's recent enough that I could say the Drunken Masters had a gig, although it wasn't a very good one. But the Drunken Masters, the Klezmer All Stars.
He's pretty much Jonathan all the time. So there's a basic honesty about him. Well, you say he's very intelligent. He's real positive. He's always cooking, He's interested in other people. He's the kind of guy that's kind of an egomaniac, but still notices other people. Mainly, you think a guy like that is going to be totally caught up in himself, but he has an interest in other people, which is very, very humane. That's a good quality. Jeez, he hears this, it's going to be terrible. We don't want to build him up.
Yeah, it's not klezmer music for your grandmother. That was always sort of one of our sayings. It's a wilder... it's also, I think, Jonathan, he plays a raucous electric guitar in that band. That doesn't go down in a lot of klezmer bands, man. Usually it's, acoustic guitar going... Well, Jonathan can do that now, but...
I don't think slick would be one of those words that anyone would use to describe his pure and organic approach to things.
Naked on the Floor, Naked Orchestra, Klezmer, The Murder, sometimes.
In 1989, after childhood and adolescent travels to the foreign lands of Philadelphia, London, and Los Angeles, an ambitious musician made a stop in New Orleans, Louisiana, and never looked back. He played guitar and wrote music in uptown funk bands, back-of-town brass bands, downtown jazz bands, and the greatest klezmer band ever to come out of the Crescent City. He is known for his generous spirit, wide-ranging musical aesthetic, and no-holds-barred performances. Even in the post-apocalypse of New Orleans after the flood, he has continued to write and work and form bands to accomplish his wild musical vision. You've seen or heard him play in many aggregations, and in the next hour, you will get to hear many of them as he delves into both their history and his, as well as comments from his friends, fellow musicians, and characters with whom he has made a varied range of music. My name is David Cunion. I'll be your narrator, so please stay tuned to Jonathan Freilichs' Freedom 00, Naked Klezmer, Latin Jazz Boogaloo, the radio documentary. Produced by David Cunion for Monkey Puzzle Productions. From as far back as Jonathan can remember, there was music in his house.
My grandfather had violins, and the other one was that I vaguely have a memory of my mother playing Otis Redding records. And my father had an acoustic guitar that used to be laying around the house. My mother really had the bigger collection. After they divorced or separated, I used to go over to my mother's, and she had a lot of records. And I remember I would get the records out all over the floor and was really into that. But before that, I remember being a little bit more open. I would go through my father's whole record collection. It was a mixture of the fascination with the record player. You know, they used to have those ones where you could stack the records on top of each other, and it would ka-chunk, you know. You get snacks, that's great. So you could screw with the speed on it, you know, 45, 33. I used to play a lot of games with that. Yeah, when I got to England, things altered a little bit.
Freilich moved with his family to England when he was a small child.
Yeah, when I got to England, they put me in school. There was a hearing test put on by the music teacher where he asked which notes on the piano were higher or lower. I can tell this was a bit of a traumatic experience to me because I can remember how clearly I can remember it. But it was a very bad test because this is a metaphor, high and low, for music. It's not the actual thing. People take it for granted. And why should a little child be understanding notes in terms of higher and lower? It's a total metaphor, whether it's high or low. It's a note relative to another tone. So he was asking me questions about high and low, and I had no idea. So they deemed me not able to take up violin when I was a little kid. I was 4. And so I was already considered not that musical.
Despite coming across such imbeciles, Jonathan went on to play violin, cello, and even some xylophone and marimba. And then in early adolescence, he had several musical revelations.
I was mostly into classical music and had decided quite pompously by the time I was 11 or 12 that this was it, and all the rest of music was bullshit. And it was just strictly down to Beethoven. And I remember I went over to some friend's house when I was 12, and they played. Now, a couple of things had gone awry. My father had a Leadbelly record at the house that I thought was pretty incredible for some reason. I was into these Bob Dylan records, sort of. But I got to my friend's house, and this one night, and he puts on this Jimi Hendrix record. So you shut up, you have to listen to this. Just speak on it. So I listened to it, and I remember my comment afterwards was, no, man, whatever, this is terrible. But I remember I couldn't stop thinking about it. It was like completely penetrated my brain to a level that, oh, this is something else. So within 3 days, I'd convinced myself completely the other way, that enough with this nonsense. And then I started playing guitar when I was about 15. I remember I was really intrigued with this Leadbelly thing. There's a curious thing, of course, that happens. I'm not the only one. There's much more noble and revered musicians who also have this particular funniness, like Duke Ellington and that, which is there were a lot of girls around these guys that were playing guitar. However, I failed to understand it. I realized that in retrospect it wasn't quite working for me that way, even though that was probably one of the attractions. I thought you had to be good at the music in order to work this, so I was like working too hard on actually learning how to play the guitar. And didn't realize that a lot of these people were just, just a prop, man. And they knew, I figured you had to kind of work something out with it.
A little after he started playing guitar, Freilich moved again.
Yeah, I moved from England to California when I was about 17. I had been somewhat convinced that my studentship was not very good and that I was going to fail at the particular branch of exams that you have to take. Therefore, I was going to have to go, work down the mines or something equally heinous. Whatever the mythology is, if you're bad, you're going to go work down the mines. But but I was apparently going to do badly enough. And, of course, my mother lived in California, which, as my father voiced it, now I see in retrospect he was right, whereas California is the land of girls and boobs. It's like, relative to London, which is the land of fog and cold and misery. Thatcher. You get to be 16, everyone's looking like the drudgery. And you're thinking, California. I had severe culture shock when I got there. I'd sort of been convinced by people who thought they were superior thinkers that it was a shallow place, which kind of hurt me. I was hurting myself with that for years there. But My impressions of LA were, it was terribly hard for me. You know, LA was a very attractive place, but for some reason I found socially I just couldn't work out how to relate to anybody. Now, that, of course, is a general teenage problem. But from the outside, it looked like everyone was doing fine, and I ended up isolated. But I did have a couple of friends there that were very into music, and we used to have a very good time, you know, listen to records, smoke dope, listen to records, you know, the whole thing. Just days and days and days of this, you know, it was great.
It's a good thing someone knows here, because we're doing this hootenanny style. This is part of our anti-professionalism bit.
It was around this time that Jonathan Freilich met his friend and soon-to-be bandmate, Ben Ellman.
It was New Year's Eve, and there was just a common friend of ours who, pretty young lady, I was going out with for the evening, who sort of sprung on me and asked if her strange friend could come along and hang out with us for the evening. That's how she referred to him as. It's kind of strange, but, you know, he looked like a guy who spent a lot of time in his room. I didn't know what it was at the time, maybe playing Dungeons and Dragons or something, you know, that type of loner who was heavily involved in something, but I didn't really know. But only later to find out that it was country blues. Yeah. And then we ended up going back to his house, and I just started playing harmonica and was sort of clueless as to who to listen to. And that night he just hit me with Sonny Terry. So we ended up with me just with my jaw on the floor listening to Sonny Terry. And then only later, like the two of us, we started playing all that music, you know, so we sort of did a little duet, a low-rent version of that. Definitely even back then, he just practiced a lot. You know, he was dedicated and he learned and he spent the time doing it. But he still always had, like, this just kind of unique sound.
Fate conspired to bring both Ellman and Freilich to New Orleans.
Well, it's funny, but really what made us ditch town is we were there for the '89 Loma Prieta earthquake during the World Series. So it flattened Santa Cruz, and FEMA came in, and we got some FEMA money and took off. I went to New Orleans, man.
Ben was like, we got to go to New Orleans, and I was trying to get to... I remember I was going to Chicago. I said, we got to go to Chicago, check out what that is. But we kept going to these musical cities anyway. I remember we were in Memphis, I think, too. These places just didn't really correspond to their legend or their mythology, you know. We drove into this city, and it was like... You could sort of tell pretty quickly that there is something going on here that wasn't going on in those places, because the city, like I said, it actually lives up to its legend, its perverse mythology, and all that. The second night I was ever in New Orleans, we read about an open mic, and it was at the Howlin' Wolf, which at that time was in Fat City, and we went by. The first person I met in New Orleans was Phil DeGree. He'd be like the guest of honor there a lot of the time. And we were out back. I remember there were like huge roaches crawling around. It was hot, like I'd never experienced it. And it just rained really hard. We were sitting out there on the step, and Phil goes, "So you guys are from Santa Cruz?" Paused rather meaningfully and said, "You're a long way from Santa Cruz now."
Guitarist and philosopher Phil DeGree.
But I remember what I said. I said, "Why'd you leave Santa Cruz?" Oh man, it gave me some excuse to get out of town. I didn't want to get too personal. It's like some people are on the run, you know. If you're here from California, you might be on the run.
Okay, we have a rather large repertoire that somehow we come out some nights, can't remember what the hell to play. I'm not sure how that works.
Freilich had some trouble getting into the music scene at first. After several months and a trip back to California, he returned to New Orleans. He started playing downtown with trumpeter Kermit Ruffins, who had started a band called the Jam Session, and he played uptown with Michael Ward's funk band Reward. He also started the jazz program at the University of New Orleans, where one ordinary morning he met several musicians with whom he would change New Orleans music forever.
I was at UNO at that time, but I remember I was looking at a board and it said, "Yoga for musicians out on the field at 7 in the morning on such and such a day." And it was taught by a fellow named Ben Schenk. So I show up there, and this particular morning, very early in the morning for me, I mean, I think I'd probably been out. I used to go to 6, 7 bars a night. You know, you remember those days. 5, 6 in the morning, at least every morning. And I run into them, and all that's there is this guy Arthur Kassler and Ben. And we start trying to do this, and Arthur's clearly, you can see the look on his face. He's hungover and lazy too. So Ben Schenk and Arthur were involved with this Kermit thing, and Ben Schenk had particular musical desires, musical things that he wanted to get out of thing, but he was also into these klezmer tunes, and he's got a certain way that he wants to do them. And there were these couple of klezmer charts, and we would go to Caldi's and play these things and some other tunes, and we had this gig.
Clarinetist Ben Schenk got this fledgling band their first gig at a coffee house in the French Quarter.
I remember riding in Jonathan's jalopy. He had this big old Lincoln or something, or Cadillac, something like that he was driving around, and it was like lopsided, and we were probably driving around and listening and just getting all excited and jumping around going, oh, we could do this, we could do this. So I started getting down and transcribing a lot of these tunes, making lead sheets, figuring out what are the chords, and called ourselves Ben and the Boys. That's what we were, and we had a gig at Caldi's Coffee House.
We started playing with Ben and the Boys. We just decided we learned one klezmer song, slipped it into this sort of New Orleans trad jazz wannabe set, and the klezmer stuff was just, it was on. It was the exciting song of the evening, the song du jour. It happened. Well, we learned another song, and then another klezmer song, and then another klezmer song, and then Ben and the Boys sort of morphed into the New Orleans Klezmer All Stars with Ben Schenk on the clarinet. Yeah, just morphed into the klezmer madness.
Grand Marshal and filmmaker Henry Griffin was present at those first klezmer gigs.
Yeah, it was Caldi's at Decatur and Governor Nichols. Basically a place you sit all day, kill some time, drink the iced coffee, and it tasted like melted ice cream. And they started in the middle of the afternoon. And while I don't have a vivid memory of the entire gig, I remember the first note. Because everybody looked up. Nobody was expecting to see klezmer music in New Orleans. First of all, they couldn't identify it as klezmer music. I don't know where you'd find that out in New Orleans unless you were Jewish. NPR. Nonetheless, they just decided to play this music to amuse themselves, and at a secondary level to amuse everybody else. And that has actually remained the guiding ethic of that band ever since. I mean, even the name, the New Orleans Klezmer All Stars, is an ironic name. They used to joke that they were the greatest klezmer musicians in the three-state area of Louisiana, Mississippi, and Arkansas.
There is not a history of klezmer music in New Orleans, according to Professor Bruce Rayburn of the Hogan Jazz Archive at Tulane University.
If we try to infer that there was a healthy klezmer tradition in New Orleans, that's a pretty shaky foundation. The approach I usually try to take is to talk about the way New Orleans culture operates, which is whatever your ethnic background and heritage is, when you land in New Orleans, you become a part of a vernacular, some would say creolized culture that builds things from the ground up. You are bringing that ethnic heritage into the mixture as raw material, but what you end up doing with it tells us a lot more about the way New Orleans vernacular culture works than it does about, say, trying to identify ethnic strains in jazz and then, give a percentage to Jewish, give a percentage to African, give a percentage to Hispanic or Latino. And the presence of a Jewish population meant that there would be, say, Jewish liturgical music out of synagogues. In other words, there is a tradition of Jewish music making here. It's probably tied largely to religious observances. And if you look at early musicians' unions, you see lots of Jewish names active on the music scene. However, I've never encountered anything that would suggest that there was klezmer being performed, that there were in fact klezmer bands.
You have to mention that one of the klezmer's greatest gigs was at Lucky's. Lucky's is a bar on St. Charles Avenue. They played alternate Wednesdays. I'll always remember it was Wednesday because Wednesday was stir-fry night. You would bring them a vegetable and they would put it in the stir-fry and they would feed you with it, which was great for those of us who didn't make a lot of money. And so I'd show up with like a carrot, which costs about 5 cents, and then you'd eat. That's how down low it was. And I think Jonathan and Alex were living on Barrack Street.
Songwriter and guitarist Alex McMurray was Jonathan Freilich's housemate and has been his musical foil for a decade plus.
Nobody even heard the word klezmer before they started doing that. Arthur Kassler, Jonathan, Ben Schenk, They brought the whole thing here. And this is at the advent of the New York klezmer scene. It was going on for a couple of years, not too long. But they were checking out Mickey Katz and all this stuff, and nobody knew anything about it. They were just playing klezmer for fun, and they just turned into a klezmer band. They've been together over 15 years. We're an achievement. Unbelievable. Klezmer band, they're going to play my wedding.
This is part of our anti-professionalism bit. Piss off the labels, piss off the other bands. You're lowering the standards for all of us. We'll never make it. Damn it, you're on the road. Behave.
Glenn Hartmann has played keyboards and accordion for the New Orleans Klezmer All Stars since the beginning.
He's absolutely brilliant guitar player, really. In klezmer, I think he's, I can say things that are fact or not fact, but certainly one of the most innovative klezmer guitar players ever, if not the most innovative. Hands down, no one is doing what he does. That's pretty special.
As saxophonist for both Galactic and the New Orleans Klezmer All Stars, Ben Ellman knows ecstatic music when he hears it.
Yeah, it's not klezmer music for your grandmother. That was always sort of one of our sayings. It's a wilder... it's also, I think, Jonathan, he plays a raucous electric guitar in that band. That doesn't go down in a lot of klezmer bands, man, usually.
Jonathan Freilich's motivations and creativity have many aspects and parts. Here he explains.
It's a mixture of all the things that I like and that I have affection for, mixed and filtered through the way that my nervous system behaves, which of course is also a changing thing, but I try to play according to what the stimulus and the sensitivities and the patterns that are showing up out of my nervous system. So there's both as you react presently, and also, I try to play with the whole of myself, which is a complete physical, mental, spiritual animal. So then I'm trying to be sensitive to all those things and do with the guitar what those things are dictating, while at the same time also trying to play with the people that I'm playing with. But mostly it's to have an emotional experience. To be honest, a tune could go out the window for all I care. I don't really want to cling on to it. There's people's hearts and emotions are a little bit more, you're more likely to get something meaningful and really happening out of the present situation. So how would I describe it as by any means necessary is really...
Flautist Hart McNee, who plays with Freilich and the Naked Orchestra and Los Vecinos, likes what he hears when he's on the bandstand with Freilich.
I would consider him the only original guitarist I've ever heard. Because the rest of them, most guitarists play a bunch of crap. And his stuff is different. Most guitarists aren't original. They're just not. And it's very boring. He's not boring. Sometimes he'll play stuff you go like, oh my God, what am I going to do with that? He'll play something like, play like, oh my, blank, blank, blank. And you go, oh man, what am I supposed to do now, But he's the only guy that I've ever played with that plays originally on guitar.
So at this point, they stop and Wonka says, this is my experimental room. He says, this is where I hone all my tricks. And he goes in and there's pots everywhere, there's stuff everywhere. There's pot everywhere.
Jonathan Freilich's musical vision has trouble being encompassed by a single band.
The way I look at this town is it's one of the few places where you don't have to be artistically constipated. If you come up with something you want to explore and you want to do it, you can call some people and say, hey, I want to try this. Whereas that would be a problem a lot of places. That people will come and try out something. So why not? You might as well say, okay, it opens up. It gets crazier and crazier how much music you can kind of get into and you start to absorb.
A lot of the Naked Orchestra for Jonathan is a social thing.
Jeff Albert has played trombone in many bands with Jonathan Freilich.
It's like, I want to get a bunch of my friends together and play some music. There's this musical drive behind it, but a lot of it, it's really a social thing. It's like, I like these people, and I want to hear them play music, so I'm going to make this gig and get all these people on it, and then I can hear them play. Yeah, we'll hang out, have a few beers, play some stuff, and, I think that's part of I know that's part of why we do it, too. We definitely don't do it for the money.
Alex McMurray.
Jonathan's always had this ability to just call anybody. He's fearless. Jonathan's like, well, why are you so uptight, man? Just call him up. Who's ready for the gig? I'm like, well, I don't know. Maybe well, just call him. You got $50? Call him. He'll do it. I'm like, no, you wouldn't want to hear this stuff. He's like, no, you're wrong, Alex. You're wrong. Call him up. Say, I got $50. Come play this song. These songs. Man, this is the biggest lesson I ever brought up from Jonathan is the kind of fearlessness. Just there should be nothing standing between you and the realization of a composition. If you need Tim Green, get Tim Green. And here's Tim Green, arguably the preeminent musician playing in New Orleans. They call Jonathan back. Jonathan calls them, and they actually return his phone call. So what am I crazy? These guys know what music is.
Saxophonist extraordinaire Tim Green explains that both Freilich's music and personality hold great appeal.
He's a very deep thinker when I'm with him or when we speak on the phone. At some point, he will give me, it might only be one nugget of something that I hadn't heard about before. So he's very interesting in that way, that you don't only learn music from him, but you learn other things in other areas of life. He's got a tremendous sense of humor. He has a real big heart, too. He cares about people and about things that are important, and he's shared that with me, and he's shown concern for me as a person as well as a musician, and that's very neat. He's a friend. With Jonathan, he's given me the freedom to creatively express even the melodies, the actual tune itself, as well as having a lot to do with how the music moves within the course of a piece. For instance, when we're improvising, or how the tune will end up going. I've been given a tremendous amount of freedom and the authority to move music in the direction of the moment that I feel this would be an interesting place for us to go. And that was instantaneous from the first time that I played with Jonathan in his band and with his music.
In the second half of Jonathan Freilich's Freedom 00 Naked Klezmer Jazz Latin Boogaloo, the radio documentary, we'll explore more of Freilich's musical groups, including the Naked Orchestra and the Jamaican-oriented 007. We'll see how his experiences with yoga and his take on New Orleans informs his art, in addition to hearing more music that spans Freilich's wide range. My name is David Cunion. Please stay tuned. Bassist James Singleton has played in many bands with Freilich. He speaks of what makes Freilich's music a rewarding experience.
I admire his compositions. I think he's a great composer. I think he's in a long line of really great composers in New Orleans, because these great pieces just inspire us to improvise, and that's been, the greatest experience that I've had in New Orleans is playing people's compositions and have it evolve into something that none of us knew was possible, and hopefully tell us and the listener something that we didn't know about ourselves.
Both Tim Green and James Singleton play in Jonathan's band Naked on the Floor. Freilich explains this band's early gigs at Café Brazil on Frenchman Street in New Orleans.
And then Naked on the Floor was starting similarly around that time. I had some ideas about some kind of more, it wasn't exactly atmospheric, but it was kind of ways to dramatize melodies. And this is where the Naked thing came from. We used to play at Café Brazil. Was the only place. I used to do a lot of gigs at Café. We'd have the early show and the late show, And so you go and do the early show, and we weren't allowed to play on stage because the reggae band would be coming in. We used to play on the open floor, wide open, in front of the stage. There was hardly anybody there. Maybe one drunk, two drunks at the bar, I think. And then the reggae band would come up and start setting up and sound checking as if you weren't there playing a show. I remember, which was really funny. It was just like, who the hell are you? And you'd be playing and they'd be setting up and sound checking. So, and I remember Kenny Claymore. I looked at the window. He's like, Jose was having like, yeah, I play Naked. He's like, yeah, that's it, Naked on the Floor, man. So that's what it was. I think it was naked music, and he called it Naked on the Floor.
He's got a very intense stage presence that sometimes can also be comical. Half hunched over and his tongue hanging out. And he waves his guitar in circular motions.
Stanton Moore is the drummer for Naked on the Floor back in the early days.
But I think that he's usually, to me, trying to evoke some kind of emotion or evoke some kind of feeling out of the people who are listening to him, as opposed to, hey, here's Birdie and here's here's the Dweedle. Birdie, 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 Dweedle, 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 Dweedle. It's like, you're not going to hear Jonathan play that. You know what I'm saying? Jonathan is trying to get you to think more and get you to feel. He's trying to do something to you. He's trying to evoke either joy or pain or anger out of you. Sometimes you might want to grab him by the neck and take the guitar out of his hand and smash it on the ground. But he gets you to feel something, And it takes a lot of courage, I think, to really put your neck out on the line like that and really, expose yourself in a way that, I'm going to take a chance right now, and half the people in this room might walk away thinking that I can't play guitar. Of course, anybody who knows Jonathan knows that that's not the case, but sometimes, the music that he plays is so different, then people don't know what to make out of it. And some people might walk away, oh my God, that was the most brilliant thing I've ever heard in my life. And some people might say, are you sure that guy knows what he's doing? And that's the magic of it. Sometimes you hear him, that's the thing, is that he'll always surprise you.
Incidentally, you know what? We might not be able to give you anything, but we can send you some weird mail that you can delete. The great thing about email is you just hit delete and it's gone. Please come up and collect some more e-crap right here. Right here. I want to make it sound as great as possible.
Another facet of Jonathan Freilich is his work with several Latin and Caribbean-oriented bands, which include Los Vecinos and the reggae rock-steady band 007. Musician Joe Cabral has shared stages and studios with Freilich in both these bands. He explains 007.
It's really fun. It's a joy to just like learn these tunes that are very basic tunes and not, there's, the complexity is in the subtlety, and that's kind of the cool thing about it. Restraint is the key issue of the day, and it's like, what don't you say and how you play it. is more important than like the notes. It's a very, very cool band. It's no hassles. Everyone is just like, don't sweat. We have a few mottos, and one of them is don't sweat the rock steady. You know, it's all good. And so yeah, don't sweat the rock steady. It's cool, you know.
Trombonist Jeff Albert played with 007 while substituting for guitarist Alex McMurray.
Like, I played some 007 gigs with him when Alex was in Japan. Jonathan took over the skank role, and I was the solo voice on a couple of gigs. And in that thing, he sounds like a Jamaican. Like, he can really get very much in the appropriate stylistic bag.
Don't know. You take me for a jerk, but that won't work.
At a certain point, Freilich wanted to expand the Naked on the Floor band. Here he explains why.
Naked Orchestra. Well, that was when I started that. It was like I was hearing Naked on the Floor, but with more colors, and I wanted to deal with more orchestration things, and I also wanted to build things around these characters. It was really quite polarized out here in those years, and so I was like trying to have a lot of different kinds of musicians play with each other at the same time. It was sort of both a musical project and it was also a social project, which is to quell paranoia and dissimilarity between people and different kinds of players that are out there. So the really thing to do is put them there and have them be playing some music that's other than what they are, you know. So then you do that, and then this is it. Then it's a common experience amongst everybody, or not, or they have different reactions to it. Really, it's to show a cohesiveness in absolutely disparate behaviors and sensibilities.
Professor of music and flautist and piccoloist for the Naked Orchestra, Dr. Janna Saslaw sees many things going on in the music of the Naked Orchestra.
A lot of the tunes are very danceable, so he uses a lot of rhythmic stuff that's just fun to listen to and to dance to sometimes. He likes to leave a lot of flexible room for improvisers to just do whatever they feel like doing. The tunes are really superior. They're just so much more interesting, and I can listen to that band over and over and over again. It's wonderful each time. And plus, the musicians have been hand-picked by Jonathan to be people who can just respond to each other and listen to each other and work off each other and lift the whole thing higher. You don't know how each tune is going to go at any one performance.
Dr. Jimbo Walsh is also a professor of music, and he is the conductor and sometimes arranger of the Naked Orchestra.
The materials that he works with and the way that he works with them are always highly creatively skewed in provocative ways. At the same time, I'm trying to find the right word. It's chewy. There's a lot to chew on. It's a chewy music. It's generally the meat portion of a meal. There's not much froth. Yeah, it's an interesting experience trying to conduct a large group of New Orleans musicians who are used to pretty freewheeling situations and trying to get them to do things that are intensely disciplined and coordinated without taking away from them the freedom of spirit and stuff that, you know, is what gives this music its feeling. So,
if you judge a band leader by the results, he's marvelous.
Jeff Albert.
I have never done a gig with Jonathan that didn't have some moment of just transcendent music happening. Every gig I've ever done with Jonathan, there's been some point in the gig where this is why we spend our lives doing this.
Mark Bingham has engineered the Naked Orchestra's recordings and has over 35 years in the music business.
The amazing thing is that you can get that many people to come in there and play, and there's no economic base. So it kind of reminds you of when you're in college and all you do is practice, and you could call, oh yeah, let's play. And then you get grown up and it's like, it's not let's play, it's like, well, how much is the gig pay and what are we playing? And then it becomes sort of sour and professional. The Naked Orchestra is kind of like professionals being amateurs, in a sense, in the good sense.
Yeah, it's definitely his Naked Orchestra.
Drummer Kevin O'Day has experienced Freilichs' work both from the audience and from the drum riser.
To me, that's his most full realization of the music that's really there inside of him. It's amazing to see. It's been amazing to see him put that together.
He's a provocateur. He's always looking to rock the boat.
So it's avant jazz. So my joke now, by the way, I actually hear it's the bottom line. How do I put myself now? I say I'm savant-garde. We're here to guard the savants. We're trying to guard the savants. Yeah, the idiot savant-garde. Sure, we're here. We champion the savants, man.
Take it easy, no need to worry.
Owner of Valid Records, Benjamin Lyons has produced Naked on the Floor and been an avid fan of Freilichs' music. He talks of the correlation between Jonathan's art and personality.
Jonathan is a bundle of contradictions in a way, and I think he likes that because I think Jonathan's a yoga practitioner, a very serious yoga practitioner. He's also my yoga teacher, and I'm sure he'd be glad that I would understand that part of what we're doing is trying to reach a higher state, and yoga is able to keep two contradictory ideas in mind at the same time. Jonathan is a bundle of contradictory ideas. He totally will not compromise. He never compromises, but what he won't compromise about changes all the time. He's not a person of a fixed principle other than exploration. I think exploration is his fixed principle. At any one moment, he's all about what he's doing at that moment, but that can change. That does change.
Yes, of course, had a positive effect on him.
Becky Lloyd has known Freilich since he first moved to New Orleans. She is a yoga instructor and has traveled with Jonathan on yoga study trips to India. She explains how she sees that yoga has worked for Jonathan.
And maybe gave him somewhere to channel some of his kind of pent-up energy that he has. Because he'll take that into his practice and stand on his head for 10, 20 minutes. He has an intense practice. He's in his head a lot. He's definitely in his head, and maybe that helps to bring him a little bit more out of his head some. Although I think he practices from his head a lot.
Mark Bingham.
Well, at first he was like, that's the old joke, he was a great bunch of guys. And then he got into yoga, and then the yoga thing really changed everything, and I think the outlook to, which is, a lot of people who have been bequeathed with complicated personalities, finding something like yoga to focus and simplify it makes the world a lot better.
Yes, very much for the better.
Kevin O'Day has observed this change.
He was, and I mean, it's kind of like, well, who am I to say? But it's been actually pretty fantastic and humbling to see the transformation with Jonathan, because he really was sort of a loose cannon at times and kind of high-strung. And now he seems to have really just settled into himself. He's much more comfortable in his own skin, I think. And it's really coming through in his music. And I just see the inner peace that he has now, and it's pretty amazing to see.
the practice of yoga has focused Freilichs' musical philosophy. New Orleans Klezmer All Star accordionist Glenn Hartmann shares this.
He and I have had conversations about this kind of thing, and it's when you're dealing with music and you're just putting a beauty out into the world, for him and me both, it's like our way of trying to right what's wrong, kind of. It might sound like a little lofty, but there's nothing bad about it. Not hurting anyone, only doing good. And I think that that's the role of a lot of art, and I think Jonathan feels that way too. Put the beauty out there and see what comes back.
I try always to go out, if I can remember it, to go out with some kind of sense of purpose or attempt to make things more beautiful, more clear, more something. And then also, I think there's particular things running through my head that I think are beautiful. They're really okay, and I think they're beautiful. I really like this here.
Stanton Moore.
I think that Jonathan's music is certainly, to most people, not directly related to the traditional New Orleans lineage, but I think that what is indicative in Jonathan's music is that, you know, New Orleans is a melting pot of all kinds of different things. So Jonathan is always blending different influences, and they're usually influences that a lot of people haven't never heard of before. He's blending different types of scales and different types of modes and different rhythms, and so, you know, what's been cool is that he's been able to create music that doesn't matter if it's commercially viable or not. It doesn't matter if people are going to show up or not. It's artistically viable, and it's something that he sees and that he wants to compose and realize.
It's a humble approach. This is the humble approach, and that's a beautiful thing too. You say, okay, I'm gonna take the humble approach. And I can do that too. I can take the humble highway, or you can take the highway of, excuse me for existing, man. You know what I mean? Which is another way. It's sort of humble, but it's also like giving in. Like, I give in. This is the noise that's coming out of me. I just have to accept it. What do you want me to do?
Oh, Lord. I mean, that he just took the whole music world in New Orleans and just stood it on its ear.
Kevin O'Day.
He's not the only one that's out there doing this really creative, very different music, but he's brought his own sort of brand of it to the forefront, and he's made it to where it's cool to do some very different sounding music. And he also doesn't really care if anyone else likes it or not. It's just that he's doing what he's doing because he loves it. And that's cool that he made that hip in New Orleans.
Well, I think that Jonathan has shown that you can have a musical vision that is different, and you can follow that, and you can get people to participate in that as well, you know.
Dr. Jimbo Walsh.
The people who are from New Orleans, by and large, are going with the party. However the party goes and wherever the party's at. If you are a good musician and you move to New Orleans, you'll wind up playing with pretty much everybody in a couple of years, no matter where you're from, no matter what you look like. None of the things that matter other places count. What matters here is, can you make the party happen? And Jonathan can make the party happen, and so he was totally accepted by the musicians here. I mean, he played with Kermit, played with those people in the uptown funk scene and can make a party happen. So hence he's a successful New Orleans musician. And I don't distinguish between high art and low art. I just don't buy into that at all. Down here, partying is part of the day-to-day art. And with as much effort as we put into Mardi Gras costumes and such, you know, it really is an art. And so playing the party and making it happen is an art form.
If you really want a mambo, you gotta spend some dollar combo.
Jonathan's legacy, we already see it today.
Alex McMurray has seen the evolution of both Freilichs music and the scene in which he performs it.
He was one of the progenitors of genre bashing. He was in a klezmer band and a Latin band and a funk band all at the same time, you know, whatever. His legacy is the legacy of a lot of guys. Andy Wolf, Rob Wagner, James Singleton, Kufaru, guys that played in a lot of different incarnations. And the thing about New Orleans music as it came to be known in the last decade, it's like, well, let's play Latin music today. Let's play rock and roll today. Let's play symphonic music, creative jazz, whatever they call it, you know, experimental music, free jazz. He's one of many people that did this kind of thing. So his legacy is actually happening. He made it possible. You know, all these younger guys coming up, you know, the template is there, and guys don't give a rat's ass. It's like, let's play music.
Without Ben Ellman, Jonathan Freilich might never have made it to New Orleans.
It's honest. That's what I'd say. It's an honest performer. He's not into any kind of theatrics, really, except if he's feeling them, really. That you can be guaranteed that they're the real deal, you know? He ain't faking nothing, man. He's just not afraid.
Glenn Hartmann.
He's a passionate person, you know, about anything, whether it's, I mean, if he's drinking or playing or whatever it is, he's doing it as hard as he can. He's really thoughtful. I think he has a reason for doing almost everything that he's doing. Like he doesn't just run around with no intention, you know. And loads of fun.
I like doing these things. I love playing for people. I love all kinds of music. That's another thing. When you get to other places, people are into kinds. You're a kind of thing. You have to be. They don't understand like a certain kind of freedom of personality the way that this city does. This is a freedom. Tomorrow if I wake up and I'm not myself, everyone says, my God, you're being eccentric. And then they get over it and you can do whatever you want. You know, this doesn't really fly other places. There's a certain consistency that's demanded that really is kind of fake to me. I don't think you can do it. Since my music isn't based on this kind of artifice, you know, it's sort of organic. And, you know, maybe you get to see something meaningful happen or something where you can really learn something.
Jonathan Freilich's Freedom 00 Naked Klezmer Jazz Latin Boogaloo, the radio documentary, was produced, written, edited, and narrated by David Cunyon in the years 2007 and 2008 for Monkey Puzzle Productions. The producer would like to thank Renee Bigelow, Dennis Fermento, Patricia Hart, Joshua Jackson, Ashley Keaton, Andrew Cunyon, Stephen and Lois Cunyon, Benjamin Lyons, Dr. Bruce Rayburn, Dr. Janna Saslaw, everybody at American Roots Radio, Dr. James P. Walsh, Walker Lassiter and everyone at the Louisiana Endowment for the Humanities, Karen Kern and everyone at the Arts Council of New Orleans, everybody at WWOZ FM New Orleans, and a special thanks to Jonathan Freilich for years of tip-top musical mayhem and for all he encompasses. This program is funded under a grant from the Louisiana Endowment for the Humanities, a state affiliate of the National Endowment for the Humanities. This program is supported by a grant from the Louisiana Division of the Arts, Office of Cultural Development, Department of Culture, Recreation, and Tourism, in cooperation with the Louisiana State Arts Council, as administered by the Arts Council of New Orleans. The opinions expressed in this program do not necessarily represent the views of either the Louisiana Endowment for the Humanities or the National Endowment for the Humanities. Remember, renew, rebuild. New Orleans, still a living national treasure. Planet New Orleans, please come home.
You know how he does that thing with his tongue? Have you heard this story? Maybe about 10 years ago. And his father, who lives in England, came to town. And the scene is Snug Harbor, and somebody brings Jonathan's father to Snug Harbor, where Jonathan's playing with, I don't know, somebody. Jazz gig or something. So they're playing, blah, 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 and suddenly it's Jonathan's solo. Jonathan gets to take a solo, and he starts in with the tongue. As soon as he has to start thinking about a phone number or anything, he will start with the tongue. And his father goes like this, oh, God, is he still doing that? I know Jonathan. I know that the tongue means that he's thinking, that he's processing. His machine is running, and it's overheating is what it's doing, and it needs the cooling factor of the tongue. He's like a lizard. That's how he cools his brain, is with the tongue.
The tongue? Oh, man. The tongue. It's unconscious, you know. But I don't know. I understand there's like these synesthesia things in the brain, and there's parts of the brain that are connected, that are close, like the hands, things that control the hands happen to be close to the tongue, and there's that. I really don't know what's going on, but I do notice that it's not the only time I'm concentrating, and usually when I'm concentrating in a way in which I'm absorbed, that's something that tends to be going on. But I don't do it on purpose. Michael Jordan does it too.